Good evening and welcome to the TNT Show. First of all, our apologies for being unable to bring you the show last week. I'm afraid COVID was at the root of it all. This has happened to lots of people, and they've had much more serious situations than we had. Again, we're sorry we couldn't bring you the show last week. As you know, we're in our second century of the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thanks to you, as I say every week, the TNT Show and Indie Live are growing and delivering more exciting shows. You can watch the TNT Show on IndieLive.net. It's also streamed out to YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. And apparently unionists have been at pains to make sure we can't use TikTok. I mean, who knows what's that's about. Oh, by the way, if you go to YouTube, you can tune into all the previous shows. And now you have a special chance to support this vital channel. Go to the donate facility, please. Not right now, once the show is through, and donate whatever you can to keep Indie Live producing these fine shows. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy. I give you the portentous words from one of the front runners who, when asked what he'd achieved from Scotland, Sunak said he was proud of what he'd done in Darlington. There are a whole bunch of very upset people in Darlington who thought for a minute that the border had been moved significantly. It's further south. Tonight we'll be talking to a very special guest. We'll be discussing the Cheviot, the Stag and the Black Oil. For those of you who have a younger age and don't know about the show, listen to what our guest tells you tonight because it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I will be talking about Scotland, culture, music, and much else besides with Dolina Maclennan. And she's here for a full hour, and she'll be taking your questions live. So there's still time to get your question considered. You'll find the details on the screen. As you know, the TNT show stands for The Nation Talks. So in many respects, as I say every week, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Thanks very much for joining us, Dolina. How are you tonight?
I am quite well, thank you, John. It's nice to be here.
Well, I'm delighted you can join us. Now, I mentioned the Cheviot, the Stag and the Black Oil, but tell us a little bit about your progress towards being a supporter of self-determination for Scotland.
Well, mine started quite young, but I didn't know there was a channel for it because I was aware at the age of 12 when I went to Nicholson Institute in Stornoway, which was only 30 miles away, that because I spoke Gaelic, this was out in 1950, it's changed since then, that we were made fun of. The country people were made fun of and we were called country Maoris and such. And I think something happened to me then that I wasn't aware of. I wasn't old enough to be aware of that. Something happened within me that our culture was as good as anyone else's. See, I didn't speak English until I went to school. So I wasn't really aware at that age of what was happening in the rest of Scotland or much of anywhere else because there was no television and we only had the wireless on it and an accumulator, and it was only on for the news and the McFlannels on a Saturday night and Scottish dance music. So that was my culture. Only later on in life, we had a culture, but we weren't aware of it as a culture. Yeah. And now it's everybody's learning Gaelic, but it's not just Gaelic. It's our history that we were denied. Until I grew up, and two things happened in my youth as well. There was the Islay disaster, of course, that people didn't talk about so much because there was so many people lost to our island. But then in 1923, if you read a book called The Metagamma, what happened then was the Westminster government took the Canadian Pacific Railway and they sent ships, the Metagamma and the Marloch, to Lewis and Uist, and took 1,000 young people away. young men and women. And they were taken to America and Canada, and they were indentured to farms and factories. Some of them did well, some of them came back. I got the whole story from a man who did come back, and they were treated like slaves because slavery wasn't all that far behind. So our biggest export from the islands was our people. And with them...
And for the benefit of those who might not know, Dolina, what's the difference between an indentured person and someone who's enslaved?
Well, they had to pay they were paid, but they had to pay their fare back to the Canadian Pacific Railway. And some of them escaped, just run away. And there were lots of Gaelic-speaking hobos around the roads of America after that time.
It reminds me of a story I heard about the Governor General of Canada going to this outpost in the provinces. And he said he wanted to go to one of the Native American encampments. And so he was in a fort at the time, and the captain of the fort turned to this bunch of disheveled Indians in the corner and said to one of them, "MacDonald, would you like to show the gentleman?"
Yes,
maybe the case that some of these people who ran away from the Trans-Pacific became very friendly with the folks who lived there. Who knows?
So I didn't know really that there was until I came to Edinburgh in 1957, and in 1958 I met up with poets and singers, and at that time that was my first awareness that there was a movement called the National Movement. But really, just a few intellectuals like McDermott and a few ragtag and bobtails that I met with were part of it, but you didn't join then. So it took me until 1974 to actually join the SNP. Yeah.
And before you joined the SNP, was it your feeling that you felt your language and your culture was being insulted?
Well, it still is. Any money that's given to Gaelic language, there's letters in the Scotsman saying that it's a useless language, and only so many people speak it, and what's the use of it, and it's shouldn't be spent money on, and so on and so forth. But then it was a joke, and even when I spoke to friends, they would say, "And how are you, Dolina, all together?" Just mocking our accents, and I had to put up with a lot of that. On the other hand, I was very, very lucky because I got involved with the folk scene. And before me, there had been wonderful singers. The one before me who was still alive and became a very good friend was Flora McNeil. Now, she was collected by Alan Lomax, and so were quite a lot of island people. But it was more of a cult than an acceptable movement. The only Gaelic ever heard was the National Mod, and that started in 1982 in Oban. In 1892 in Oban, and but that was stylized as well up to a point, because they didn't sing traditional songs. It was all they had to sing what they were asked to sing, in choirs and gold medals and so on. So it's only recently that people have actually taken grip of the traditional side of things.
Well, that's all to the very good. Now, what changed for you in 1974? What happened?
Well, lots happened before then. I was, by sheer chance, invited to sing for a ballet, Scotch ballet. And I sang for an entire ballet on stage with the dancers. And through that, before that, I'd met George Reid, who was then a director at STV before he became a member of Parliament. And we had a conversation in a film later on, and he echoed my belief that culture comes before politics. If we lose our culture, we just become another political party. And I would really like to see more backing for our culture in our own parliament here in Scotland.
Is
What
it
happened
your-
in, sorry?
Is it your view that culture comes before politics?
Yes, absolutely. Because without, if it's not in your soul, it just becomes vocal, you know. That's, we see a lot of that. Anyway, what happened after the Scottish Ballet thing in 1972, John McGrath came up to Scotland and he was looking for cast for a play that at that time didn't have a name, but it happened to get a name, and she had The Stag in the Black Oil. And that changed the face of politics and theatre in Scotland, because we went round every village and main theatres, and we went to, we were actually chosen, the Cheviot was chosen to go to Brussels to celebrate Britain joining the, what was it then? Wasn't the EU, it was the
Common market.
The Common Market. Mm-hmm. And we played in the Palais des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, and a show and another show in Ghent, and we flew back the next day and played in Betty Hill in Sutherland. You know, it was just. But then we did so many villages, islands. We did two tours of it, and it's well, people are still talking about it, and I must give thanks to Dundee Rep for reviving it again a few years ago. But what we presented was a shock to people, because it was the first time their own history had been laid out in front of them. And there was fun in it. It was full of fun, but then it was stark truth. And you could see people in the audience, you could see their faces changing, you know, and realizing that the fun was the way of getting across the power of the historical part of it. But anyway, with hope, we thought we were finished at the Lyceum, and I'll never forget that night, because they had to open the gods, and it was very, very emotional. It's one of the things that stays in my mind. And then we were invited to go to Ireland, tour Ireland. And we did a week, I think more than a week, at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. And one of the nights, we always went upstairs to chat with audience and so on. And this man put his arms around me, and he was crying. And he was so emotional. And I said, he said, "Oh, what a nationalist you must be," because I was the only Gaelic speaker. And I was the singer. That was when I had brown hair and no wrinkles. And he said, what a nationalist you must be. And I said, well, I'm a patriot, but I can't equate nationalism with socialism, because I was brought up very strict Labour. And he said, well, remember what Connolly said. And I said, well, what in particular? And he said, a nation, first of all, has to be free to make its own decision. And I said, thank you, sir. And I went to the phone, and I phoned my husband, and I said, I'm joining the SNP. And on the 4th of July, 1974, I went to Manor Place and signed in, and I've been working ever since. I'm now a honorary life member of the party, and honorary vice president of my local branch, which is Edinburgh Central.
I'm going to ask you to do that's absolutely fascinating, and we'll talk perhaps some more about the Cheviot, the Stag, and the Black Oil in a second, because I suspect there might be particularly younger people in the audience tonight who may not be aware of what the message was and why it was so important and why it was central to what happened thereafter. But I want to ask you a favour. I know I asked you before the programme started not to read the stuff that's on the column on the side of your screen if you've got it up.
Well, I can't, because I haven't got my glasses on.
Don't worry about it then. That's my Gaelic isn't up to
nice. I hope they're all nice messages, but I can't.
I suspect they're very nice, but I'm afraid my Gaelic isn't up to it, and I don't want to sort of in any way upset our audience by mispronouncing things.
Oh, my phone's ringing, and I thought I had put it to silent, but never mind.
Oh, don't worry about that. So, tell us a little bit more about the the Achievie at the Stag. What was the principal message? And you also talked about people for the first time became aware of their history. What historical incidents or events do you think became more evident to people as a result of that production?
Well, how it happened was John McGrath got all of us together. Bill Patterson, Alex Norton, John Bett, Alan Gross, Liz Maclennan, Dave Maclennan, and there were only 8 of us, and we did everything. We didn't have any stage managers or group or anybody to help. We did everything ourselves. And he gave us each something to go away and research and then come back after 3 days. And he put it together. We all contributed to the script, but John actually put the script together. And the reason it's called the Trivia told the story of the clearances, and especially, focusing mostly on Sutherland, but also mentioning every other place that was cleared, and to make way for sheep. And the people were sent off their little crofts, some of them to the seaside, and some of them to America, some of them all over the world, some of them to Glasgow. And having lived in the beauty of the countryside of the Highlands, they found themselves in the slums of Glasgow and other places. That was the 19th century and before and since. And then the stag was when Queen Victoria bought Balmoral. Every hopeful bought land in Scotland and cleared the people off again. We still have those huge estates. But then they were mostly owned by Scottish landowners and English landowners, but now they're owned by people from across the world. I'm not going to go into it in case I get into trouble, but the whole of Scotland is owned. But the reason it's called 784, at that time, 7% of the population owned 84% of the wealth. Goodness knows what it is now. But and then the black oil was in 1973, the oil was coming, and the purpose of that was to what would happen, don't let it happen again. Yeah. I remember my last song that I always finished with was written by Madivona Noran, Mary McPherson in Skye in 1892 as well. And she said, remember, you are a people and fight for your rights. The wheel will turn for you by the hardness of your hand and the strength of your fist. Your cattle will be on the plain and everyone in the land will have a place. But she also said there is gold under the mountains where you grew up. There's grey lead and gold. She mentioned everything and told us, don't let it happen again. And this was the message of the whole thing. You got the clearances, you got the landowning part, which I said was the Balmorality, and then there was the oil, and we've let it all go. And when we presented this as a piece to the audience, it was quite something to be on that stage and watch them from tiny little villages like Embo and just all over, even in the Uists, in Stornoway, in Tarbert Harris. I remember in Tarbert Harris when John Bett was playing Patrick Seller, who was the factor of the Sutherland estates. This woman got up and cursed him. And it was very dramatic. Yes, it had huge impact, and it was wonderful to travel the country with this message.
Yeah, it must have been wonderful as an actor to have someone.
It was
how much
life-changing for so many people. I still meet people who say, you changed our lives. You told us something that we didn't know before. And as young actors, Jimmy Yule, Jimmy Chisholm, all those people became actors because they helped us out. They helped us with the get out in Golspie and so on. And,
And
we were fascinated with the way we were working.
And what was your role in the production?
Well, I was all sorts of people, but mainly the singer.
And what did you sing?
Well, I sang, the theme through it was Magachi, my home. And after every bad thing that happened, I would come and sing, Shall Halder Nashik and Faskig and Groove, and Mohan Big Galad Gaelic Leil, Shudak of Magachi, Shetaki Mogil, in Hashtals and Nubel of Sharlem. And this was to show that what we had was still there. And it means it's still there, and I prefer it to every castle in the world, you know. Yeah. So after every atrocity that happened to our people, that came back in, you know, just to say yes.
Well, that was just wonderful. You said you weren't going to sing tonight, but I very much enjoyed it. I
mean, I used to be a soprano.
No, you're being too modest. Oh, by the way, I must say a big thank you to all the folks who've written to us in Gaelic. Again, my apologies. If my Gaelic was up to it, I would ask Dolina or convey to Dolina what you just said. But I think I get the gist of it, that you very much like what you're hearing. And also Patrick Mann has been in touch on Twitter. And he said it's sort of like the Irish language in Northern Ireland. People here mock it. In Northern Ireland, they mock the Irish language. And I guess that's a reflection of the politics there, I should imagine. And from that point of view, you could argue that Scotland has come quite a way, because I don't hear anyone mock Gaelic now. Well,
you just read the press when Gaelic gets money.
Well, maybe, Dolina, that's more of a reflection on the Scotsman readership than it is on the language.
Of course. There's thousands learning this.
Exactly.
What's it called? What's it called? The Gaelic thing that everybody's learning. Duolingo. Yes, yeah. Thousands, and we've got nursery schools. We've got so many schools now. Yeah. We've got primary schools all over the country for Gaelic only, and then in Edinburgh we haven't got a secondary school yet, but our primary school pupils go to Gillespie's. But in Glasgow they've got an actual secondary school for Gaelic. You can go through from nursery right to your hires. I've got a good friend, Isabel, who's learning Gaelic, and some of her grandchildren are learning Gaelic as well. So, you know, if you look when I went to the Nicholson, you could take, this is very funny as well, you could take French and Latin, you could take French and Gaelic, but we were B class. French and Latin was the A class. French and Gaelic was the B class. But I had the most wonderful Gaelic teachers who taught me all the poems of the John Drummond and Rob Down and all those people. But I had wonderful English teachers as well, especially Mr. Webster and Jean McLean, who taught me drama. Webster was my drama teacher, who gave me the what's the word I'm looking for, a Gaelic word, Smith, who gave me the marrow tenseness of wanting to act. But Jean McLean introduced me to so much English poetry. So I did my hires in the poetry of the Nochaban MacIntyre and Chaucer. Oh. Now, the reason I liked Chaucer was because he's a bit bawdy, like Gaelic, you know. I much preferred him to Shakespeare. And his stories are magnificent. And even though they're in an old English, they appeal to me much more than anything else. I think it was The Partner's Tale I chose.
Now, you've told me something I didn't know tonight, that Gaelic is bawdy. I didn't know that.
Oh my goodness! Oh yes, you can tell jokes in Gaelic if they were translated. You would be Yes. And naughty songs and that, but that's between ourselves. We don't.
Well, not anymore.
There's few and fewer Gaelic speakers of my generation left to still appreciate that nonsense, but it's still there.
Well, I don't know. I once went to a show about Robert Burns at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it was entirely body.
Oh yes, the Merry Muse.
I had no idea.
Yeah, all that's gone now. Everything's so politically correct. You can't have a laugh anymore.
Well, these things are cyclical. They come and go, and they change around, and situations alter. Now, we shouldn't go any further until we've mentioned your Saltire Award. When was that? Remind me.
That was in 2012, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've been involved with the Saltire Society ever since. I finished in September. I was co-opted onto the board 6 years ago. So everybody does 3 years. And I kept saying to the director, is it not my time to go? She said, no, it's not. So I wasn't actually on a proper board member for 3 years. I worked very hard and been on festival shows and all sorts of things. But unfortunately, I finished up the vice convener and I'll have to stand down in September.
Oh, okay.
After 6 years, I'm going to miss it tremendously, but we've got a huge festival program this year, which is going to be published tomorrow or Friday.
Oh, good. Where, if people are interested, where can they go to get a copy of the program?
On the Saltire Society website.
Okay.
And it'll be on YouTube and everywhere as well.
Give us a few of the highlights.
Well, I think one of the best ones, they're all good, but on a Friday, we're publishing our own pamphlet, which has been made by Dundee University pupils who went to the Saltire archives. The Saltire's been going since 1936.
Oh my.
It was there before the festival, before Scottish Orchestra, before anything, and it was created to promote Scottish culture in all its forms, and which suits me perfectly. And those pupils from Dundee University have made it's more than a pamphlet, it's a book, from inspiration they got from going through the Saltire archives. And then on a Friday night, we've got Jim MacLean and Alistair MacDonald. Jim MacLean wrote all the protest songs, and he's coming up from London, and Alistair MacLean's going to be singing his songs, the Anti-Polaris and all that stuff, and beyond. So that's going to be hugely exciting. Then on Saturday morning, we have a class of recital for anybody who wants something nice and easy to listen to. And on Saturday afternoon, we're launching the book that's just been published, being launched tomorrow in, I think it's Wigton, a book about the life and poetry of Willie Neal, who was a friend of mine. This is his 100th year. He would have been 100 today. And he wrote in Gaelic, Scots and English. And on the Saturday afternoon of the 20th, we're having a relaunch of Willie Neal's book. And on Saturday evening, we've got Valentina Bold and Christine McHugh on James Hogg, his history and his songs. So that's our programme.
Sounds excellent.
All weekend, yes.
Well, I hope a lot of people watching tonight will manage to get along if they're in Edinburgh. Because it sounds like something which is going to be absolutely
It all happens in our own premises in Fountain Close.
In Fountain Close. Excellent. Well, I hope that goes well. And do you use these shows to raise funds for the society? Is that part of?
Well, yes, we've got we didn't used to charge, but we have to charge because we have to pay our guests.
Of course.
So you can get a ticket for the whole weekend for £35. And if you just want to come to one show, it's £10.
Okay.
But there's also, you get a glass of wine as well, but there's also a contribution box that anybody can put money in to help us keep going.
Well, I hope they will, because it sounds to me like it's something that's highly deserving. It's a bit like Indie Live. It's one of those things that I think people who are interested in culture really ought to support. And I say that advisedly because so many people complain to me on social media that they don't like what the BBC does, they don't like what Westminster does, they don't like what... Well, turn it on its head, folks. Here's something you do like. So rather than sort of be fussed about what you don't like, support the stuff that you do like. And it gives you a positive mentality. You feel as if you're doing something as opposed to simply complaining about something.
Yes. Especially those who don't belong to a party.
Exactly.
Because we've got thousands of yes voters across the country. Because I was up in Golspie at the Manifest weekend. And I think that's why I'm here, actually, because I did a vox pop kind of thing.
Yes.
and Kevin heard it and said yes. Anyway, and there was a lady there from Skye, and she had just got registered yes from every island in Scotland. She was just waiting for Shetland to come in, and Shetland came in. Every island in Scotland, she's got a yes vote. Now, I don't know if how many of those yes voters are part of a party, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Because our party in our party in Holyrood is our channel. But you don't have to be a part of it. You just have to vote when the time comes.
I would go a little bit further. I think you need to vote, and you also need to try and persuade your next door neighbour to do likewise.
Well, you don't need to tell me that.
Exactly. So that's got nothing to do with parties. That's got something to do with people turning up.
It's to do with our country. It's to do with what we've got, what we mustn't lose. And I still look on the party, I still look on it as a movement, because that's what it was, a movement. Mm. And up till 2007, it was pie in the sky, even though we had we'll be free in 93, which is a lovely slogan, But I don't like slogans because it's too tempting to believe in them.
Also, slogans date.
Yes, well, that one especially, yes. Yeah. But, I mean, it was pie in the sky until 2007 and then 2011 and so on. And now it's just nobody ever expected. Devolution itself was a dream after 79. And then for us for the SNP to become a ruling party in Holyrood was never meant to happen.
Yeah.
So this is how I feel that politics have taken over from the movement, from the culture. But I think the movement is growing at roots, and I believe that it's got to come from the roots. It's got to come from villages. And I love marches. Oh, I just love going on the marches. But they're mostly in cities or big towns. And that's why I love Golspie so much, because I think we should have them in small places just to let people who live there know that they're cared for,
That fits very neatly with an idea that we had from one of our guests recently, Big Marky, who said, hey, I would like to see the civil service dispersed amongst the communities, the towns of Scotland, not concentrated in Edinburgh and Glasgow, for example. And that's a fair point, because the likelihood is if you do devolve down, then you get hopefully a better level of participation, and then also the civil servants feel closer to the people they're serving.
Well, I think civil servants are so hidden from us that I think it's got to be at community level. Mm. I think I've always believed in communities looking after themselves because they know what they need.
Yeah.
We're
I mean, there's lots of parts of American society that are not commendable, but one of the things they do very well is they do bring effectively authority and power to a fairly fundamental level. I mean, the local sheriff, as well as the dog catcher, is elected by the local people.
Yes.
And you create, so why shouldn't that be the case in Scotland? I mean, it's not as if you're talking 300 million people. You're only talking about 5 million. Surely involved.
But you see, where power is, that the people in power are very, very hesitant at wanting to give it away and disperse it.
I know. That's one of the reasons I'm a big believer in a written constitution, because that from the get-go you say that the people are sovereign and that power is devolved, it's hard then for the politicians to pull it back to the centre again. Though I do understand some things need to be centralised, but I think they should be kept at a minimum.
We need a focal point. We need a central focal point, but let it be like an octopus and have its wings, have its tentacles throughout the country.
Good. Well, that certainly makes sense to me. So, say for example, there's what do you think ought to happen if Westminster continues to deny a referendum?
Riot.
Okay.
I mean, it's just become so preposterous in the last few years, especially.
Yeah.
And I heard mistrust, or whatever they call her today, saying, what was it she said? I will not have an independence vote. I will, and she's not. It's not her right to say that she's going to keep it from us. I mean,
well, and then again, you could argue, and I'm going to be devil's advocate here, if you forgive me. You could argue it's a perfectly sensible position for her to take, because if she's continually and continuously told it's your choice to deny people their choice, then of course she's going to exercise her choice, which takes you back to the rioting thing. But I'm not even sure that would be effective, I have to say, with respect, because it seems to me a lot of this dogmatic attitude is to actually produce circumstances where there might be rioting. So then they can point the finger and say, look, we told you, that's why you need a strong union.
Yes, that was just a throwaway nonsense.
I understand.
But something's got to happen, and I'm hoping that the courts will come out in her favour.
The strong likelihood is, though, that they will not. I mean, if I was sitting in the Supreme Court and somebody asked me to decide whether or not a component part of a country ought to have permission to leave, let me tell you what the problem is, I think, as I understand it. It is that you're asking a group of people in the Supreme Court to make a decision about constitutions against the backcloth of an unwritten constitution. I mean, for example, the situation in Spain is very clear, it seems to me, and that is the Spanish constitution expressly prohibits any change in the territorial integrity of the Spanish state. That's very clear. And that means that it will be very difficult for Catalonia to move forward, because the constitution prohibits any change of that nature. It would have to be done entirely harmoniously and in conjunction with a Spanish government. This British situation is not at all clear, which is why the Supreme Court, I think, will have enormous difficulty. Though I think at the end of the day, they will opt for the parliamentary sovereignty as overriding the claim of right, as it were. And of course, that will produce an explosive result.
But are we not supposed to be equal partners in this union?
Well, no, if it depends where you believe that sovereignty lies, it seems to me. If you believe that sovereignty rests with Parliament, which is the English position, that's one thing. And therefore Parliament could decide whether any part of the union or any part of the state ought to be separated. And that would be unequivocal. It would require their approval. If, on the other hand, you believe that sovereignty is vested in the people, which is what the Claim of Right says, and the Claim of Right has been endorsed in both the Scottish and the British parliaments, then you're into a very different ballgame. Because then you would have to say to the Scottish people, despite what we told you or led you to believe, you're not sovereign. And we here, i.e. the British Parliament, under parliamentary sovereignty rules, would decide your future. You can negotiate with us if you like, but that's as far as it goes. That would mean that there would have to be something in place that allowed the Scottish people to have a view in a different environment, I suspect.
Well, I think if they keep refusing that, we've got so much support for our independence across Europe. I get messages frequently from people, keep going, and I think most people realize that the last few years from Westminster has been an international disgrace, actually. I've cringed at some of the things I've seen,
Yes.
So addressing an international serious convention to talk about Pippa Pig, I mean, I was ill. And people realize that we have some dignity here that hasn't existed south of the border in Parliament in Westminster for a long time. And I watched the debates, and I was horrified. I mean,
what was it that horrified you, Dolina?
Everything. their attitude to each other, even, and praising each other. And they were all apart from one, they were all part of the government that was just like Boris's reign. And we're all part of it. And they're saying we must do this and we must. Why the devil didn't they do it when they were part of it? And I watched his last Prime Minister's question time today. I must be masochistic in some way, but I have to watch it just to scream. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace, and we must get away from it.
Well, I think Boris Johnson. I think when the Book of Independence is written, which I hope will be soon, I think a great debt of gratitude ought to be extended to Boris Johnson. And I say that most sincerely. But then again, I'm only echoing the words of the First Minister when I say that. But I do sincerely believe that we owe him a great debt of gratitude, because he whipped away the cover and showed us what things really look like. Because one of the arts that was used in the past to persuade people that everything was pretty good, hunky-dory, if you like, was the fiction that this was a voluntary union.
Mm-hmm. But he calls it the country, and it's not. When he refers to the country, he must be referring to England, because there are 4 nations.
Yes.
In the union. And I heard a woman, and I applauded, even though I was sitting by myself at 11:15 last Thursday night, and I just applauded her because she said, Brexit has not been done. She came from farming stock, and she said, and she referred to the 4 nations, and she was the only person in a panel for a long time that actually said the 4 nations. Yeah.
I just feel that I want to make a quick remark. I want to take a comment from Charles Smith in a second. Just a quick remark. I heard you were talking about rioting. I heard Martin Lewis, who is the expert on personal finance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He said that he expected on the day that the new Prime Minister takes their seat or moves into office, that there will be a national cataclysm. He says there's a financial time bomb set to explode in September. And you can see this on YouTube if you care, folks. And he's very clear. He's saying that the cost of fuel is going to spiral to such an extent that the people who are looking towards a fraught Christmas will find themselves facing a hugely desperate Christmas. And he's thinking particularly of people on fixed income, because the cost of living is rising.
Well, you know, of course, that in the Highlands and the islands, it's even more expensive than it is anywhere else, and that's the places that produce more wind energy, and the oil comes ashore and everything, and yet it's cheaper in London than it is where it happens, because we export it, you know. And we also, what annoys me and which people don't realize, that all our exports go from English ports, and the taxes go immediately to London. So everybody says, you know, the money we make out of whiskey, the money we make out of shortbread, even the money we make out of our salmon, everything, and all the taxes that should come to Scotland go to Westminster. Yeah. And it's our people who work on it. Also through Brexit, our inshore fishermen, our creelers, and they can't export anymore, because there used to be at Malig and other places, there used to be huge big lorries from France and Italy and Spain waiting to take all the prawns and the crabs and the lobsters and everything. They got there within 24 hours. And now they can't even sell them. Yeah. And quite a lot of them are going to the wall. Yeah. And people say, but the fishermen voted for Brexit. I don't think they did. I think the fishermen who own the big trawlers voted for Brexit, because they can go ashore anywhere, you know, and fish for a week or 10 days out in other waters. But for the local fishermen, they're more or less finished. Yeah. I come from a herring fishing family. My brothers had it was all boats ever since they grew up. My father bought the first boat, and our last boat was called the Seafarer. And the Seafarer was the last drifter fishing fishing the Minch, along with a boat from Harris called the Constant Friend. And the Seafarer and the Constant Friend still got big fat herring, you know, and only surfaced drifted. So they got it. They were conservationists before the word became popular. So they got dispensation from Brussels to carry on fishing, just the two of them, and Westminster refused. And Donald Stewart, who was the SNP MP at the time, he fought for them in Parliament, but no, they were refused. So they had to come ashore and get jobs. One of them started weaving, another one started working at the roads, and another, my brother Murdo, who's still alive, he started trout farming in a local loch, just anything to keep them alive, because fishing was their life. Yeah, I mean, it's very sad. I want to move us back onto Gaelic, if I may, for a second. Charles Smith is asking, Gaelic. He's saying Gaelic was a spoken language mainly. How did the indentured immigrants that you spoke of, who went to or sent to Canada and the Americas, etc., communicate with their families back home? Did they use written English, or was it some sort of phonetic Gaelic? No, everybody spoke English. Well, quite a lot of them spoke. We were taught English when we were 5 years old. I remember my first ever Gaelic phrase was "the cat sat on the mat." Yeah, and but we were taught English as she spoke. You know, we didn't learn any accents or what's the other word I'm looking for? We didn't. So it was totally new to me. You know, when I heard English words that I wasn't aware of before, you know, and it was through people like Jeannie Robertson and singers like that I learned Scots, that I learned to appreciate Scots. Also, to go back to poetry, we were taught poetry at school that I didn't realize was a song, that there was music to it as well, until I heard the big wonderful singer Jeannie Robertson singing it, and Jimmy Macbeth, and Willie Scott introduced me to the border folk music and folk culture. So I was very lucky to be involved in that from day one, from 1958 onwards. And it was a case of learning from each other at the time. And they began to appreciate Gaelic songs. But the people writing, we always wrote in English. Even my mother, at the age of 90, she died when she was 96, but right up until she died, she would write to me. The drawer down here is full of her letters, and she wrote in English, though Gaelic was her. She was fluent in English, and she wrote it, and everybody wrote English. Yes, and my father, he went to join the Hudson Bay, so he spent his early years in Canada, as did my grandfather. So well traveled. So, but having said that, I knew more place names across the world than I knew in Scotland, because seamen would come home. They were sailors and merchant seamen, and they would come and tell stories of all those faraway places in Montreal and just all of them, you know. And it was like a fairy tale at the time when they came home and told all those stories.
Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. But am I right? That Gaelic is more written now than it was back then?
Oh, it's always been written.
It's always been written. Okay.
Always been written. Apart from Duncan Ban McIntyre, who couldn't write, he couldn't read or write. His poetry was taken down by oral tradition. It's published now. Okay. But and also the minstrels went round with news of battles and things, and that was all oral. But the Bible's in Gaelic, and I found a little book that recently somebody sent me, just a few leaves of a book that I took to the National Library, and but it was just a few pages of it, and that was written in 17 something or other, but it was very ancient Gaelic, so it's always been written. I mean, I could read Gaelic and English, you know. Yeah. And funnily enough, for Gaelic services, the Bible has amazing Gaelic, and all our services were in Gaelic, and you got to learn some all of the poetry of it as well. Yeah. Of this Gaelic, and it just stays with you.
Yeah, you mentioned that your father worked for the Hudson Bay Company,
and my grandfather.
And your grandfather.
My grandfather went in 1860, and my father went in I think it was 1910.
And that must have meant enforced absences from the family. Surely you must have spent months over there.
But what happened was, it happened later with the Salvesons to go to the whalers. The ships would come into Orkney and then down to Stornoway to take them, if they wanted to go. This wasn't forced, it was choice, to join the Hudson Bay, because there was a big family, and my uncle Donald was the oldest, and I'm called after him. He had the croft at 18 Marrick, but my father and his younger brothers, my father went to Canada, my uncle Alec went to the shipyards in Glasgow, because only one brother could stay on in the croft.
Okay. Okay.
So that's how it worked. That's how we're so disparate across the world, because the crofts were so small that they couldn't. Well, a croft can't sustain everybody anyway. That's why you have to have another job like weaving or fishing to go along with it.
Incidentally, what did your father do in the Hudson Bay Company?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know too much, except that he eventually became a trapper in his own right. But he died when I was 12, my first term at school. But he was also a diabetic, and he couldn't go to church on Sundays because he had to eat at 12 o'clock. And it was in 1940s, diabetes was much more complicated than it is now, because he had to inject himself night and morning and stay on a very strict diet.
Yeah.
He spent because I was the youngest of 8, and by 6 years, it's an accident. And he kept walking up and down telling me stories about Canada, about socialism, about the world. He was really talking to himself, but I think I was taking it all in and indoctrinated in some way or other. I don't know how he would feel about what's happening now. I'm sure, I don't think my brother Donald, if he was alive, he was such a staunch socialist, he wouldn't agree with me. But I think my father was a good thinker. He would have understood the need for self-determination.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's interesting. I mean, an interesting story, and there must have been so many Scots in the Hudson Bay Company and elsewhere.
Oh yes. Well, I went there with I went there with Murray Grigger. We were going to make a film in English, Gaelic, and Cree. And we went to St. John's Bay, St. James Bay. We didn't get as far as St. John's Bay. And we spent a week there with the Cree Indians. And because 7 women came to the island of Lewis as brides of Hudson Bay men. But they didn't live for very long. But you're still seeing the streets in the villages and streets of Lewis, this amazing Indian face, and in Orkney as well. But a lot of them called themselves country wives in St. James Bay, because and their phone books were full of Orkney and Lewis names. I looked for a Maclennan, but they weren't any. So my grandfather and my father must have behaved themselves.
As far as you know.
As well, yes. They didn't anyway.
Yes. I'm interested in the expression country wife. Yeah, that's
yes, because they were wives of the men while they worked there.
When they worked there, yeah. And they were from the Cree Nation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And another thing, we're going from the mainland to the little island. None of them wore their safety things, the things that you're supposed to put on when you're in a boat. There were the cushions on the seats, just like they have at home in the old days.
Well, I did say, Dolina, that the hour would go quickly, and it has. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to say to all the folks out there that you haven't had a chance to say up until now, briefly?
Yes, I would really like to say that ever since I got to know them, I've loved Nicola and I've loved Alex very much, and they're good friends of mine. And I would like everybody to stop this nonsense of being on one side or the other, because truth be told, we're all on only one side, and that is independence. And I don't care who gets us there in the end, but we have to work together. And because any bickering between factions is just food for the unionists to laugh at us and use against us. So that's my wish, that party or no party, you don't have to be part of a party as long as you support our ultimate aim, and that's independence. And that's what I hope I live to see it. I'm in my 85th year now,
I
and
hope so too. These are wise words.
so many of my friends whom I loved very much have gone, and without seeing what they worked so hard for. And I think on their behalf, we should all work together.
Yeah, and celebrate their memories. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. It's a great note to end on. If you could stick around once the show is over, that would be really terrific. It would be a quick chat. I'm just going to wind up now, if I may, with a few comments. A big thank you to Dolina, obviously. It's been a great show tonight. I think we aim to be educational and entertaining as well as informative. And I think we did all of that tonight. We'd very much love to know, by the way, from all of you who weren't in favour in our poll that we were running during the show of independence. If you'd like to let us know why, that would be very interesting. Maybe you'd like to come on the show, you'd be very welcome. We're very all-embracing here, as you know. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Again, we've got some big hitters lined up. Go to the What's On guide for more details. We'll be back on August the 10th at the same time. We're taking a short break. Particularly our producer, Kevin, he's taken a very well-earned break. And at that time, on August 10, we'll be speaking to novelist Emma Gray. As always, do look out for my column in the Sunday National this weekend. You'll find it in the 7 Days supplement. And I'll be discussing the Tory leadership contest, where I compare the two final candidates to Wayne and Waynetta, because there is a striking resemblance there, it seems to me. So in closing, a further reminder, it's been a great day to sum up British democracy. And I want to use the words of W.B. Yeats, who puts it, and it struck me very forcibly, his words, when I was watching these debates that took place for the Tory leadership. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Thank you for joining us tonight. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
And please donate whatever you can to Indie Live. Good night, all.
Good night.